begin my pre-trip, as I approach the vehicle, what I check for is to make sure the truck is straight. There's no damages to anything, no hanging cables or wires, no puddles underneath on the ground. Okay, starting my engine compartment. I start from the coolant reservoir. Make sure it's secure, properly fastened, correct nuts and bolts, properly capped, properly filled above the add, below the max. Also check, make sure there's no damages. Damages will be any cracks or any dents. Also make sure no leaks. Okay, and then go down to my hoses. Make sure my hoses are all secure, properly fastened with the correct clamps and fittings. Make sure that there's no damage to the hoses. Damages will be bulging, cuts, cracks, and frays. Also make sure that there's no leaks. Check the serpentine belt. Make sure that there's less than half to 3/4 of an inch free play. Make sure the serpentine belt is secured to the alternator, the air compressor, and the water pump. Also check, make sure that the belt has no damages. Damage will be cuts, cracks, and frays. And also check to make sure it's not rubbing on anything sharp that could eventually cut it. Okay, then go back and check the alternator. Make sure my alternator is secure, properly fastened, correct nuts and bolts. Make sure no damages to the alternator, no dents, no cracks, and no voltage leaks. Check the cables, the electrical cables. Make sure they're secure, properly fastened with the correct nuts and bolts. No damages. Damages would be cuts in the casing, cracks in the casings, exposed wires, fray wires, and also make sure no voltage leaks. Check the air compressor. Make sure that's secure, properly fastened, correct nuts and bolts. No damages. Damages will be bent or cracked, and no air leaks. Check the oil cap. Make sure it's secure, properly fastened. And you go check the dipstick, oil level. Okay, make sure the oil is properly filled above the add, below the full. Also check the color of the oil. Make sure it's the right color, not white or creamy. And make sure there's no metal shavings in the oil. Okay. Then we check our washer fluid reservoir. Make sure that's secure, properly fastened with the correct nuts and bolts, properly capped, properly filled, and no damages. Damages will be cracks and no leaks. Go down to the frame. Make sure the frame is secure, properly fastened with the correct nuts and bolts. No damages. Damage will be bent or cracked. No illegal welds in the frame. Down to our suspension, which consists of our spring mount, eye bolt, leaf springs, U-bolts. We got 2 more eye bolts and a shackle, and then back to the spring mount. Make sure they're all secure, properly fastened, correct nuts and bolts, no damages. Damages will be bent or cracked. Also I checked the leaf springs. Make sure your leaf springs are all in line, none of them bent, cracked, missing or broken. Check our brake lines. Make sure our brake lines and hoses, the brake line and hose, make sure that they're secure, properly fastened with the correct clamps and fittings. Sure no damages. Damages will be bulging, cuts, cracks, frays, cuts in the casings, exposed wires, frayed wires, and no leaks, no fluid leaks, and no electrical leaks. Check the shock absorber. Make sure that's secure, properly fastened, correct nuts and bolts on the top and bottom. Also check the bushings. Make sure no damages. Damage will be bent or cracked. And also make sure that the shock is not leaking. Okay. Down, check our brake caliper. Okay. Caliper, make sure that it's secure, properly fastened with the correct nuts and bolts. Make sure no damages. Damages will be bent or cracked. and make sure no leaks. Also, we look inside and make sure that our brake pads have more than a 1/4 inch. Okay, we also check the lining on our pads and our rotors. Make sure they're smooth, no hairline cracks, no deep grooves, no oil or grease. Okay, go back and check our rims. Make sure they're straight. Make sure they're secure, straight, not bent, not cracked, no illegal welds. Check our tire, sidewalls, and the treads. Make sure that there's no damages to the tire. Make sure that there's no bulging, no deep cuts, no foreign objects, no exposed treads. Check the condition of the tread. Make sure that there's no uneven wear. Also, we make sure that the tread depth is more than 4/30 seconds. Has more than 4/30 seconds tread depth. Okay. We check our tire stem. Make sure that's secure, properly fastened, properly capped. Make sure no damages. Damages would be bent or cracked, and no leaks, no air leaks. Check our pressure. It should be 110 pounds PSI. Okay. Go down and check our lugs and studs. Make sure they're secure, properly fastened. Make sure that they're all there. Make sure no damages, none of them bent or cracked or missing. Also, we make sure that they're all tight, none of them loose. We can tell if they're loose from rust trails or oblong holes. Check our front oil hub. Make sure it's secure, properly fastened, correct nuts and bolts. Check the seal. Make sure that it's not leaking. Also make sure that it's properly filled and properly capped. Okay. Also, we check for damages. Damages will be bent or cracked. And make sure nothing's leaking. Okay, go back to our splash guard. Splash guard, make sure it's secure, properly fastened, correct nuts and bolts. No damages. Damages will be torn or ripped. And make sure it's spaced from the tire and the ground. Okay. Okay. On this side, we check the power steering reservoir. Make sure it's secure, properly fastened, correct nuts and bolts. No damages. Damages will be bent or cracked, and no leaks. Also, we check the level. Okay, make sure it's properly filled above the add, below the full. Also, make sure that there is no discoloration and no metal shavings. Okay. Go down, we check our water pump. Here, make sure the water pump is secure, properly fastened, correct nuts and bolts, no damages. Damages will be bent or cracked, and also not leaking. Okay. Right in here we got our power steering pump. Check that, make sure that there's no, make sure it's secure, it's properly fastened, correct nuts and bolts, no damages. Damages will be bent or cracked, and no leaks. Also, the power steering pump is gear driven, not belt driven, gear driven. Okay, come here, check our master cylinder and the reservoir. Make sure that's all secure, properly fastened, correct nuts and bolts, properly filled, properly capped. No damages. Damages will be bent or cracked, and no leaks. Our transmission fluid, we check when the engine is running. Come down, we check our steering shaft, and the steering gearbox. Make sure it's secure, properly fastened with the correct nuts and bolts. Make sure there's no damages. Damages will be bent or cracked, and no leaks. Check our power steering hoses. Make sure they're all secure, properly fastened, correct nuts and bolts, fittings and clamps. Make sure no damages. Damages will be bulging, cuts, cracks, frays, and no leaks. Also make sure that there's no sharp metal objects for it to rub up against to eventually cut it. Come down and check my steering linkage. Consists of my pitman arm, drag link, steering arm, steering knuckle, steering arm, and tie rod.
Check over that again. Yes.
Okay, you got your drag link, which consists of your pitman arm, your drag link, steering arm, steering knuckle, and the steering arm, and the tie rod. Okay, make sure they're all secure, properly fastened, correct nuts, bolts, and cotter pins. Cotter pins. Okay, make sure that there's no damages. Damages will be bent or cracked. And also check, make sure it's properly lubricated. Okay, and everything else on this side we check just like we did on the other side. Okay. Okay, after the engine compartment, we'll do a walk around. Start with the mirrors. Make sure the mirrors are secure, properly fastened, correct nuts and bolts, no damages, none of the brackets are broken or loose. Also check the mirrors, make sure that they're clean, clear, and not cracked. All the mirrors. Okay? Go down, check my battery box. Make sure it's secure, properly fastened. Not gonna fly off on the freeway. When I check the batteries, I make sure that they're secure, properly fastened with the T-bar, no damages. Damages to the battery would be bulging or cracks, and no leaks. Also make sure the batteries are properly capped. And I check my battery cables, make sure that they're secure, properly fastened, correct nuts and bolts. Also check the cables, make sure there's no damages. Damages will be cracks, cut, exposed wires, fray wires, and no voltage leaks. Okay, from there we proceed to the middle of the truck. Start from the top. These are my clearance lights. I have amber in the front and red in the back. Make sure each light has 2 screws in the lenses. Make sure they're secure, they're properly fastened. No damages. Damages will be cracked lens or missing or broken lens. Below every light, there's a reflector. 2 in the front, 1 in the back. Make sure that they're clean, they're secure, fastened, clean, and visible. Okay. We'll proceed under. Check the frame and the U-bolts. Make sure that they're secure, properly fastened. No damages. Damages will be bent or cracked. Check the drive shaft. Drive shaft mounts. And U-joints. Or universal bearings. Okay? Make sure they're all secure, properly fastened. None of them bent or cracked. Could be damages. And then also check, make sure they're properly lubricated. Proceed to the rear suspension, the spring mount, the leaf spring, torque bar, and the U-bolts, and it got a spring mount in the back, the rear spring mount. I'll make sure that's all secure, properly fastened, correct nuts, bolts. Make sure there's no damages. Damages will be bent or cracked. The leaf springs, I check and make sure that they're all in line. None of them bent, cracked, missing, or broken. Then I check my tires, my rear tires. Make sure that they're the same size and the same type of tire. Okay. I check all the sidewalls and the shreds. Make sure that there's no bulging, no deep cuts, no foreign objects in the tires. Okay. Also check the condition of the tread. Make sure that there's no uneven wear, and also that there's more than 2 30-second tread depth. Check my spacer. I make sure that the rims are butted up together, no light coming through them, and I make sure my tires are not rubbing or touching. Also, we check the spacers, make sure that there's no objects in there, soda cans or beer bottles or rocks that can become projectiles. Okay. Check your rim, my rim, make sure it's straight, not bent or cracked. No illegal welds. Also, make sure it's not warped. Okay. Take the lugs and the studs. Make sure none are missing. Make sure they're all secure, properly fastened. None of them are loose. Loose you can tell from the rust trails and the oblong holes. Check your rear axle. Make sure that's secure, properly fastened, correct nuts and bolts, no damages. Damage will be bent or cracked. Also check the seal. Make sure no damage is there and no leaks. Okay, check the tire stems. 2 of them. Make sure they're both secure, both properly fastened, none and properly capped. Make sure none of them are damaged, none of them are bent, and none of them are leaking. Okay, check the air pressure. Should be 100 psi in the back. Okay, 100 there, and 100 there. Okay, back here, check my rear splash guard. Make sure it's secure, properly fastened with the correct nuts and bolts. No damages. Damages would be torn or ripped. Also, it's spaced from the tire and the ground. Okay, check the rest of my frame. Last part of the frame, make sure it's straight, not damaged. Damage would be bent or cracked. Make sure there's no missing bolts. Make sure there's no illegal welds. Okay. And into the rear, we'll check the rear shock. Okay. Rear shocks. Make sure they're secure, properly fastened, correct nuts, bolts, bushings and the spacers. That's what makes it different from the front, is the spacers. Make sure there's no damages. Damages will be bent or cracked. Okay. We'll check our brake hoses and our brake lines. Brake lines and brake hoses. Okay, make sure that they're secure, properly fastened, correct fittings and clamps. Make sure no damages. Damages to the hoses will be bulging, cracks, cuts, frays. Damage to the lines would be cracks in a casing, exposed wires, frayed wires. Make sure that there's no electrical or fluid leaks. Check the calipers. Make sure it's secure, properly fastened with the correct nuts and bolts. Sure no damages. Damages will be bent or cracked. Also make sure none of them are leaking. Also I check my brake pads. Make sure that there's more than 1/4 inch of pad. And also I check the pad lining and the rotor lining. Make sure that there's no deep cuts, cracks, oil or grease. Make sure they're both smooth, the linings. Okay, let me proceed to the rear. Underneath, yeah. You can just point, I just pointed to make sure that they could see the parts here.
Oh, okay.
That's why I went under there. But they don't want you to go underneath these bolts here. Okay. Put your head under here. You hit your head coming out. So don't go under those bolts. Yeah, you can come from here and then just point to the parts.
Okay.
But I guess you hit your head there and then you gotta go emergency, get stitches. They don't want that to happen down there. Might be a good thing, they might pass you. And then again, they might fail you. Okay? So we start from the top. Our lights. Outside lights are the marker lights. Inside 3 lights is the identification lights or ID lights. Okay, make sure they're all secure, properly fastened with the correct screws. No damages. Damage will be a broken or cracked lens or missing lens. Okay, come down. Make sure this roll-up door is down and secured, and the lift gate is up and in the lock and locked. Now it's not locked. Okay? Make sure it's secured so it don't open on the freeway. Okay? Below the lights you have your reflectors. Make sure they're clean and secure and visible. Check my rear bumper. Make sure it's secure, properly fastened to the truck, not damaged. Damage will be bent or cracked. Also in here we'll check the cross members, cross frames. This is to the truck frame, all the way down. Make sure they're all straight, in line, all secure, properly fastened. No damages. Damages will be bent or cracked. And these are the box cross framings. Make sure they're all aligned up and straight. Make sure that they're all secure, properly fastened. None of them damaged. Damage will be bent or cracked. Okay. Check our tail lights. Make sure they're secure, properly fastened with the seals. No damages. Damages will be cracked lenses or missing lenses. Okay, these are our driving lights, turn lights, and brake lights. And these are reverse lights.